So now we'll have the first speaker again, and I will welcome back to the stage Professor Anne-Marie Andersson, who will set the scene for this session.
Well, I will do it short because I hope that this morning's session convinced you all that we have all the evidence we need to know that endocrine disruptors that are present in our environment do pose a threat to human health. There's no question about it for me, and I think the evidence is really strong. But the question is then, well, what do we do with this knowledge? Because if this knowledge is just something that we have in the scientific community, it's not going to make much changes. And what we really want to do, and why we are in this field, is we want to protect the population against these effects. So how can we take this knowledge and make it live and make it useful for regulation, for the public, and for the individual citizens? And I think we will address that in this session, and then I think we will have a lively discussion in the end as well for that. So I won't take more time. I will present, or you will present the next speaker.
Thank you so much. Yes, and the next speaker will be online. It's Mr. Paul Speight, who is the speaker of the session. He is also the head of unit of the safe and sustainable chemicals within the European Commission. And UNIS is instrumental in the development of the upcoming proposal for a REACH revision and a centerpiece of the EU's legislation on registering, evaluating, authorizing, and restricting chemicals, which we have talked about today. His unit is also organizing the annual EDC forums in Brussels, where scientific societies often have been given a prominent role in the program. And we are really honored to have you with us today online. The floor is yours. Yes.
Many thanks, and many thanks for the invitation. I'm sorry I wasn't not able to be with you today in Copenhagen. I think it would have been very interesting, but unfortunately, just spent the last couple of weeks in Geneva at the Triple COP, which is we can also maybe touch on. And so, yeah, it wasn't really possible to travel again straight away. But I hope you can all hear me fine, and I'm certainly happy to outline a little bit what is happening in Brussels, and then to discuss with you later. So I think the first thing I wanted to say is that there have been a lot of really positive developments in the fields of endocrine disruptors. A lot has happened on the policy front. The science is making its way into the legislative framework and into the policy framework, and there have been some really significant developments. At the same time, obviously, I'm sure if you are following a little bit the discussion in Brussels and also certainly in some national capitals, there is also great concern about the situation around the competitiveness of the European chemicals industry. And this, of course, finds its way into the policy framework. And I think what we're being asked to do as environmental policymakers is find a way to improve the level of protection of the environment and human health, but in a way that maintains the competitiveness of the chemicals industry. And so we can balance those two objectives. So this is a bit the broad overall picture and a little bit where we are today. And I'll come back to what might be happening next at the European level shortly. But first, I think it's always good to remind ourselves that that some of the things that have happened since the chemical strategy on sustainability was published, there have been some really positive developments. And I think for endocrine disruptors, the really big positive developments was what happened on what's called the CLP regulation. So classification and labeling mainly. And this, I think, is really, really important because it brings endocrine disruptors in a more stable way into the regulatory system. And although it's only just been done, the consequences of this will play out over the next years. And this is where we will get the benefits as we feed the system with the science that comes from your work and that comes from the pipeline, if you like, into restrictions, into authorizations and other steps. So briefly, what's in the CLP? So it establishes new hazard classes for endocrine disruptors. And it was adopted in December 2022 and published in March 23. So these hazard classes, these are based on the definition of endocrine disruptors of the World Health Organization, and they build on the existing criteria that we have for pesticides and biocides. And the advantage of putting them in CLP is that they will apply across all of the chemicals legislation, all of the 70 different pieces broadly. The CLP is the cornerstone of that legislation. And once you get it in there, you have a very influential effect. So we have separate hazard classes for human health and the environment, because this is the distinction that's in the legislative framework. And you also have the existing categorization system. So category 1, where they're known or presumed; category 2, suspected endocrine disruptors. And this is what exists for CMRs. And it's very important to have afterwards a kind of a nuanced response to risk management. And now on the labeling front, you have a new hazard statement, but you don't have a specific pictogram for endocrine disruptors. So basically, this will now roll out. So industry will need to classify their substances and mixtures for endocrine disruptors from the 1st of May 2025, so basically from now. But if they were placed on the market before, then they have a little bit more time until 1st of November 2026. And then for mixtures, it's from 1st of May 2026. And then the mixtures that were placed on the market before 1st of May 2026, they have until 1st of May 2028. And this is the traditional chemicals approach, where we always try and roll things out to make sure that it's manageable for the industry, but also for our own regulators, for ECHA, for the member states. And then there will be transfer from what was in the pesticides and the biocides towards the end of this year. And we already see that people are starting to put in unified dossiers for endocrine disruptors. So the first one was submitted by France to the regulatory, to the RAC in ECHA. And this is on the substance resorcinol. So here you have a development opinion. And other dossier submitters, they are also thinking about endocrine disruptors. We have also tried to make the link to the international front. So we have proposed the introduction of new hazard classes under the United Nations GHS. And there is a working group established, and this work is ongoing. So I think the CLP sometimes flies a bit under the radar compared to REACH, but really it shouldn't, because it's such an important keystone. And this introduction will really have positive effects that will play out over the next 5, 10 or more years. So that I think is very important. Also, more recently, but also very important, is our colleagues working on other regulatory fronts have also been active. So for food contact materials, there was a ban of bisphenol A and other bisphenols in plastic food contact materials. This was last year. And then just very recently, we have the regulation on toy safety. And here we will have this regulation. Also, it already banned a number of things. I mean, you would hope so in toys, right? But it will now prohibit the use of chemicals that affect the endocrine system or the respiratory system. And it will ban certain dangerous bisphenols and PFAS in toys directly. So I think those are all really positive developments. And then I think it's worth saying as well, of course, certain PFAS, they are suspected endocrine disruptors, and there is a lot happening on PFAS. I won't go into that because it's a bit of a separate story, but the universal PFAS restriction, this is a big thing. It's taking up just as much time as political interest as REACH revision itself. But I think it also does have implications for endocrine disruptors. So I'm happy to ask questions if you want me to go a bit more into that at a later stage. So now let me come a little bit to what is a bit the mood in Brussels and what we are planning on doing. So yesterday, the president of the European Commission met. She had a strategic dialogue on the chemicals, and she met mainly with industry, but there were also some NGOs present, unions, and consumers organizations. And there at this, she announced that we would work on a chemicals industry action plan, so already for this summer. And there, of course, I mean, the main aim is to kind of improve the competitiveness or maintain the competitiveness of the industry. But of course, from our environment point of sight, we are trying to make the case that we see that our industry is competitive when they innovate, when they substitute. You know, this for us, this is the way that they should compete with the Chinese, with the Americans, you know, to think on their feet. Yeah, they will not have lower labor costs than the Chinese. They will not have lower energy costs than the US. So their competitive advantage should be on innovation and substitution and moving forward, you know, safer substances, responding to the genuine consumer demands. Should be at least one way forward. So of course we are trying to bring that into the system. And we are trying to do concrete things to make it happen. So we are looking at, for example, you know, should there be a way of sort of helping industry to make this substitution, possibly substitution centers? Should there be some money in the EU budget to help SMEs in particular move to safer substances? What does the information along the supply chain look like? You know, do the downstream users, do they have the information they need to substitute in their products endocrine disruptors or other hazardous elements? So all of this we are looking at in the kind of the policy framework. Another angle is also, you know, what do we do about the test method verification? I think this is very relevant for endocrine disruptors. You have some nice examples in France. You have the PEPA, which is a public-private partnership trying to work on these test method verification. You know, do we need to do things at the European level as well? There was a big conference in the Netherlands earlier this year. And so we're also trying to fill a lot of these gaps to try and have a really coherent and functioning substitution and innovation system for the industry. And we are also trying to be very active at the international level. Like I said, I just came back from Geneva. In Geneva, we were able to successfully ban some very hazardous chemicals at the international level. So these are perhaps not particularly endocrine disruptors, although possibly some of the PFAS ones were. So we banned long-chain PFCAs. We also banned the medium-chain chlorinated paraffin.
There's no
Sorry.
There's no slide.
Okay, I keep going. And I think this is really important because, of course, we know that we can do from our European level, we can do a lot to protect ourselves with REACH, with CLP, and so on. But in the end, many of these POPs, they circulate in the environment. I mean, these medium-chain chlorinated paraffins, you find them in human breast milk in Europe, you find them in polar bears, you'll find them everywhere. And these are 90% produced in China and essentially sold to developing countries. So in other words, if we want to stop this global circulation of these chemicals in the atmosphere, then we need to do that at an international level. So I think that last week's conference was not bad on that. We managed to get some concrete things done. And I think this is an important aspect. It's also important because of what we call the level playing field aspect, right? We want our industry to be able to compete fairly, and therefore we need to encourage others to step up. Okay, and then let me finish, because I'm getting towards the end of my time, with a little bit on REACH. So REACH, the president promised that we would make a proposal to revise REACH by the end of the year. We are working on that. Obviously, there is a lot of pressure to simplify REACH and to make it work better and so on. And I think that's fine. We can also do that. But we're also trying to make the case that we should modernize REACH. REACH is 20 years old. The scientific knowledge that we had 20 years ago, it has changed. You know, we know that there are other risks that REACH has not well handled. We had the PFAS problem. Yeah, REACH did not do a good job on PFAS. It is out in the environment. It is out in our bodies. Somehow there was a problem and it didn't do its job. So we are also trying to make the case for the modernization of REACH, and in particular, perhaps for using the famous GRA, this faster methods, generic risk assessment for endocrine disruptors, which we think would help quickly bring our legislation up to date and to have these chemicals restricted in a way that's a bit faster than the kind of the laborious process that we normally run in Brussels. It takes a number of years where we look very carefully at the risk and then we hazard and then we look at the exposure. And it does take a long time. I mean, it's very thorough. You get good results, but it's long, and the GRA is a bit quicker. So we are working on that. We're also working at updating all the information requirements, because of course, if you don't have the information in the system, then none of the regulatory system works. And we will see a little bit what the final outcome is. So I've tried to give you kind of a broad picture about what's happening in Brussels. We are also very committed to maintaining a bit our work on endocrine. We probably will not have the forum in this autumn because it will inevitably be, people will just be, but what's happening in REACH? And we will not be ready. So it would be ruined in a way. So probably what we will think would be better would be to have the next one in spring when REACH is out, and then we could take a bit stock and have a more of a serene discussion than if we tried to maintain the previous timing, which was foreseen for October. So just to finish up, we are very committed to work on this. You know, we are trying to find the right balance. Of course, you know, I'm giving you the elements, but I don't have the final clue to what exactly the last pictures will look like in the various deliverables we're doing. Other people are also involved in that. But we are, you know, trying to get that balance right. And we are aware that, you know, these health and these environmental impacts, they have not gone away because of the what's happening with energy prices. They have not gone away because of the problems of competitiveness. So we still need to have them in mind and to keep them in the policy picture. So I think I'll stop there now, but more than happy to ask questions later.